Last November, an invitation arrived in an ivory envelope, sealed with golden wax and written in perfectly curled handwriting like something from a wedding magazine. It was addressed to Caleb, Eleanor, and family. I still remember the feeling of holding that enveloped me. Fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from a familiar weight sinking into my chest. Mom wants to host Christmas at the vineyard this year, Caleb said as he read the invitation over my shoulder. She says it's going to be a big one. Everyone's coming. Everyone's coming. That phrase carried a particular weight in our family. I glanced toward the kitchen, where our daughter-in-law crouched under the table, drawing animals on the back of a cereal box. She had just turned 7. Ava always seemed older than her years, as though she had lived multiple lives. She loved moss, stones, and the quiet creatures that lived in the garden. She had an odd sense of humor, and every night before bed, she'd ask hundreds of questions that no one could quite answer. Ava is our adopted daughter. To us, that word no longer held any separation. Ava became my daughter the moment I first held her knee, timid and yet full of curiosity in her gaze. But to my mother-in-law, Evelyn, the word adopted remained an asterisk, an unspoken reminder that Ava, despite the paperwork and the love, was not blood. Still, we packed everything, gifts, warm clothes, Ava's beloved stuffed turtle, and drove the 5 hours to the Massachusetts coast. I held on to a sliver of hope that maybe this year would be different. That maybe, just maybe, our daughter would finally be welcomed as a true part of the family. The house emerged from behind snow-covered pines, looking like it had leapt off the front of a Christmas card. A warm yellow glow shone from the windows onto the pristine white lawn. Inside, classical music played softly, mixing with the scent of cinnamon cookies and the crackle of pine wood in the fireplace. Evelyn, my mother-in-law, greeted us at the door, wrapped in a crimson cashmere sweater and her familiar string of pearls. She placed a quick air kiss on Caleb's cheek, then turned to me and Ava. Her gaze landed on Ava for just a fleeting second, as if evaluating a decorative piece that didn't quite match the rest of the setting. "Hello, Ava," she said, her tone polite but completely devoid of warmth. Ava tightened her grip on my hand. I gently squeezed back, trying to pass a sense of reassurance to her. Inside, the house was overwhelmingly extravagant. The Christmas tree stretched all the way up to the ceiling, adorned with crystal ornaments and silver ribbons. The dining table was lined with perfectly folded linens, as if styled straight out of a design magazine. Evelyn had tended to every detail with such precision it felt more like a stage production than a family gathering. Children of his cousins ran wildly from room to room. Laughter echoed through the grand hall. Ava stood close to me, her eyes both curious and cautious. I leaned down and whispered, "You can go play with your cousins, sweetie. I'm right here." She nodded, shyly stepping into the whirlwind, still clutching her stuffed turtle tightly. I watched her go. My heart lightened and burdened at the same time. Dinner that night resembled a royal feast. Roast beef drizzled with wine sauce, pear and cranberry tart, and mashed potatoes whipped to silky perfection. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, orchestrating every conversation like a conductor with her baton. Caleb helped Ava serve her plate. Ava politely passed the bread around and thanked everyone with careful grace. She burst out laughing at one of Caleb's jokes, and I saw her face glow under the glimmer of the crystal chandelier. And I thought to myself, maybe this time would really be different. Maybe, just maybe, a part of Evelyn had softened. That perhaps her heart was finally learning to love the granddaughter who did not share her blood. On Christmas morning, the house was filled with the warm aroma of hot cocoa and freshly baked cinnamon cookies. A silver bell rang from Evelyn's hand, echoing through the hallway like the call to a ceremonial gathering. Everyone gathered in the living room, where the towering Christmas tree still stood tall, a flawless symbol of holiday perfection. Beneath the tree, the presents were wrapped in harmoniously colored paper, each one tied with a meticulous ribbon and labeled with elegant handwritten tags. Evelyn stood in the center of the room like a host on stage, reading each name aloud with confidence and dramatic flair. One by one, the children ran up to collect their gifts, greeted by applause from the entire family. Ava sat beside me, her eyes sparkling like a sky full of tiny stars. "Mommy, I think the purple one with the snowman is mine," she whispered. I looked closely. There wasn't a single gift with her name on it, but I smiled and nodded, trying to keep my voice steady, even as a heavy sense of dread settled in my chest. I reassured myself. Maybe her gift was hidden beneath the bigger ones. Maybe it was still in the guest room. Maybe Evelyn was saving it for last, as a special surprise. But one by one, the gifts were handed out. Cheers filled the air, and each child proudly held up their new toy to show off. Ava clapped for each of them, smiling as if she were receiving gifts too. But then there were only 2 presents left. Then one. Then none. And Ava's name was never called. She turned to me and quietly asked, "Did Grandma forget me, Mommy?" I stood up, keeping my voice as gentle as possible. "Evelyn, is there one for Ava that might have been missed? Maybe it got left somewhere." Evelyn looked up and stared directly at me, then glanced briefly at Ava. Her face showed no surprise, no embarrassment. She spoke clearly and firmly. "Ava isn't really part of the family, not in the traditional sense." The room fell completely silent. No one said a word, not a single objection, not even a sigh. Only Ava, sitting upright, blinking slowly as if trying to understand what she might have done wrong. I knelt down beside her. My fingers were trembling, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I leaned in close and whispered, "You didn't do anything wrong, Ava." "Not at all." She nodded once, then tried to force a smile. "It's okay, Mommy. Maybe Grandma will remember next year." I don't know how I managed to stay still in that moment. Caleb sat in silence, his jaw clenched, his eyes staring into the distance as if moving even slightly would make him explode with rage. I waited for Somio Niñono to speak up. A protest, a word of comfort, or just a flicker of empathy. Ava is part of this family. That's what I silently begged someone to say. Or even just, "No, this isn't right." But no one spoke. No one said a thing. Everyone turned away, busying themselves with torn wrapping paper or half-hearted laughter. My sister-in-law stood and began gathering stray ribbons into a trash bag. The kids whispered among themselves, casting glances as if Ava were nothing more than a shadow in the corner of the room. No one looked at me. No one looked at Ava. I felt like the breath had been stolen from my lungs, like the world had suddenly grown colder than the winter outside. Ava sat still, her shoulders hunched, clutching her stuffed turtle close to her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. She simply lowered her head, quiet and small, as if trying to shrink herself so no one would notice her. I knew I should have done something. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my daughter and walk out of that house forever. But I didn't. I just sat there, frozen between fury and despair. I wondered if I lost control. What would that do to Ava? If I confronted Evelyn in front of everyone, how would Ava remember that moment? And Caleb, how would he face his mother after that? So I stayed silent, and in that silence, I felt as though I had betrayed my daughter. I had failed to protect her in the very moment she needed me most. The morning passed in silence. Ava didn't mention the gift, didn't ask why. She kept trying to smile whenever someone looked her way, a faint, fragile smile, like tissue paper ready to tear. That evening, when we returned to the guest room, Caleb sat down by the bed, looking like someone who had been lost in thought all day. He opened his suitcase and pulled out a pale yellow envelope. "I brought this, just in case she did something like that again," he said softly. I had hoped I wouldn't need it. I didn't ask what was inside. I didn't need to. All I knew was that Caleb had seen enough. He got up, put on his coat, and quietly walked out into the still night. Ava was already in her pajamas, lying quietly in bed, holding the little stuffed fox she'd had since she came home to us. She didn't ask for a bedtime story. She didn't talk about Santa. She just lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling, as if her thoughts had drifted far, far away. I sat beside her, gently rubbing her back until her breathing slowed. In the darkness, I heard her whisper, "Mom, I'm still your daughter, right?" I swallowed hard, leaned down, and whispered back, "You will always be my daughter." The next morning, the house was strangely quiet. There was no music, no scent of cinnamon, no children's laughter. Everything felt tentative, like everyone was carefully avoiding something unspoken. Caleb sat by the window, a coffee mug in his hand long since gone cold. His eyes stared off into the distance, his face calm but resolute. I didn't ask what he had done the night before. Somehow, I already knew silence had ended. One way or another, Ava woke up later than usual. She quietly got dressed, brushed her own hair, and neatly folded her blankets. When I walked into the room, she was already sitting at the table, drawing swirling circles on a blank sheet of paper. She wasn't avoiding me. She was trying to manage something bigger than here sadness too complex for a child to explain. I placed my hand on her shoulder. "Do you want to go for a walk with me?" She nodded without a word. The air was bitterly cold, and the snow had yet to melt. We wrapped ourselves in scarves and stepped into the backyard. Under the bare branches of a tree, Ava bent down and picked up a small stone, tucking it into her pocket. "I'm going to take this home. It looks like a cracked heart," she said. I pulled her into a tight hug, feeling her small body tremble slightly in my arms. "Ava, what happened yesterday wasn't your fault. Not all adults know how to love." She looked up at me, her eyes brimming, but no tears fell. "But she's an adult. She's family." I took a deep breath. "She's Daddy's family. But you're my family, and Daddy's, and your own. No one can ever take that away from you." That afternoon, as the family prepared for the final meal before departure, Evelyn avoided eye contact with both me and Ava. She looked drained, quiet, no longer the center of attention as she usually was. Caleb simply nodded when she reached out to say goodbye. There was no hug, no invitation to return. On the drive back home, Ava opened her backpack and pulled out a small box wrapped in old newspaper. I turned to look at Caleb. He smiled softly. I tucked it in my suit corset to make sure she still got a real Christmas gift. Ava opened the box, and inside was a wooden pendant, hand-carved with a small inscription, "Forever our daughter." She smiled a real, genuine smile for the first time since the day before. And this time, her eyes weren't searching for acceptance. She had found I'm the only place where love is unconditional. The following year, we didn't return to Evelyn's vineyard. When the invitation arrived on ivory paper, handwritten calligraphy, sealed in gold wax Caleb simply placed it on the kitchen counter and said nothing. I didn't need to ask. Ava hadn't mentioned her grandmother once since the previous winter, and this time, we chose a different path. We rented a small cabin in Vermont, a quiet place surrounded by pine trees and soft snow with an old crackling fireplace and mismatched ceramic mugs. Ava picked the fluffiest socks she could find and wore her favorite foxprint pajamas. In the kitchen, Caleb and I baked cookies until the oven smoked, and the three of us burst into laughter as though no sadness had ever existed. There was no 12-foot Christmas tree or extravagant banquet table. But there was something more right, more real, more intimate. Ava built her own Christmas tree out of dry branches she gathered from the yard, decorating it with handmade ornaments, a paper bell, a pine cone painted silver, and a small globe she had painted with 3 people hugging. She called it my real family. On Christmas night, as snow fell quietly outside the window, we sat together, no script, no performance. Caleb read fairy tales, and I held Ava in my arms. She didn't ask where the gifts were, didn't search for a name tag. She simply held the wooden pendant around her neck, gently tracing the inscription with her fingertips. "Mom," Ava whispered, "do you think some people just can't love?" I looked at her and softly stroked her hair. "I think some people don't know how to love, and some choose not to learn. But you don't need the love of everyone, just the love of the ones who are true." She nodded. Not with sadness, not with bitterness, but with quiet acceptance. A kind of wisdom that no child should have to learn so early, but somehow, Ava had risen above the hurt. Outside the cabin, the snow continued to fall. But inside my heart, for the first time in many years, it truly felt like Christmas peaceful, whole, and no longer waiting for love from those who had refused to see the worth of my daughter.